Now, you're probably wondering, why would someone get kicked out of a party like that? And more importantly, what happens next? Was it a misunderstanding, or was there something deeper going on? Well, you're in the right place, because in the next few minutes, you're going to find out exactly what went down, and trust me, this story will leave you questioning everything you think you know about trust, relationships, and the dynamics of power. Before we dive deeper into the twists and turns of this bizarre situation, let me ask you, have you ever found yourself in a situation where everything felt fine, but then suddenly, things just changed? 1 minute, you're hanging out with friends, laughing, and enjoying yourself. The next, you're isolated, unsure of what went wrong, and trying to make sense of a reality that seems to be crumbling around you. It's strange, right? How quickly everything can go from good to bad, and how it feels like someone flicked a switch, and the world changed in an instant. This is one of those stories. Let's step into the shoes of our main character for a moment, Sarah. Picture her arriving at this extravagant party, excited, hopeful, ready to let loose and have a good time. She had been looking forward to this night for weeks, ever since she got the invite. It was supposed to be fun, light-hearted, nothing more than just hanging out with people, catching up, and maybe making some new friends. And then, it all started to unravel. Something shifted, and Sarah found herself on the receiving end of something unexpected, a push from a world she thought she understood. She wasn't prepared for the emotional roller coaster that would follow, nor for what would come after she was thrown out of the party. What happens next is something you won't believe. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could someone just be kicked out like that? What happened? Was it a mistake? Was Sarah at fault, or was something darker at play here? You'll be surprised at how the simple act of being dismissed from a party can lead to a series of events that no one could have anticipated. What unfolds after Sarah leaves the party is the real twist of this story. You're not just going to hear about a misunderstanding, a betrayal, or some gossip. No, what happens next is something far more intriguing, and you're going to want to stay with me until the end to fully understand it. Here's where things take a truly unexpected turn. The host of the party, someone who was supposed to be the one in control of the night, offers Sarah a ride home. Yeah, you heard that right. The same person who kicked her out, the person responsible for the humiliation she just experienced, is now offering her a ride back home. The complexity of this gesture is enough to make you pause and wonder, what does this mean? Is this an act of kindness or manipulation? Could it be both? And what does this ride home truly signify in the grand scheme of things? I want you to take a moment to think about that. Imagine you were Sarah. You've been asked to leave a place where you felt vulnerable, embarrassed, maybe even rejected. And yet, now the same person who made you feel worthless is offering you something that seems so simple, an offer for a ride home. But is it really as innocent as it sounds? Or could it be something more? Could the offer be laced with an unspoken agenda, a hidden motivation behind the gesture that's not immediately obvious? I'm sure many of you, right now, are asking yourself if you'd accept that ride. I'll tell you this, what happens on that drive home will answer all those questions, but not in the way you think. You're probably wondering what Sarah does. Does she take the ride, even after everything that's happened? What's going through her mind in those crucial moments? I won't spoil it for you just yet. But what I can tell you is that the choice Sarah makes sets off a chain of events that only get more intense as the night progresses. The host, who seemed like the last person she could trust, becomes someone she has to navigate carefully. And as they drive through the city streets, Sarah begins to realize that maybe this isn't just about a ride home. Maybe this is about something far more profound, something that will change the course of her life forever. But here's the kicker. As Sarah sits in that car, heading toward what she hopes is the safety of her home, the host starts saying things. At first, it seems like small talk, harmless, almost apologetic for the incident that led to her being kicked out. But then the words shift. The conversation takes a turn that leaves Sarah questioning everything. What was said in that car ride is key to understanding the entire situation. And believe me, it's not something you're going to expect. You might think you have this figured out already, but trust me, you don't. What seems like a simple ride home soon turns into an emotional game, a psychological dance between two people with their own motives and vulnerabilities. And by the time Sarah reaches her destination, she realizes that nothing is as it seems. The answers she's looking for won't come in the way she thought. The truth, when it comes, is much more complex and much more haunting than she could ever have imagined. As you continue to watch, you'll begin to see just how intricate this story is. You'll question who's really in control. You'll wonder who's manipulating whom. And by the end of this video, I promise you, you'll have a new perspective on what it means to truly trust someone and whether or not we ever truly know the people we invite into our lives. But here's the question that will stay with you. Was this just a kind gesture? Or was it something much more sinister? You're about to find out, so don't even think about clicking away. Because what I'm about to share with you will turn everything you thought you knew upside down. Keep watching until the end, and I'll answer the questions you've been dying to know. What happened that night? Why did she get kicked out? And most importantly, what really went down in that car ride home? Trust me, the answers will shock you. Stick around, because this story is just getting started. Sarah's life had never been what you might call straightforward. A 26-year-old marketing professional, she had everything on paper: friends, a decent job, a small but cozy apartment in the city. Yet, beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. One minute, she was mingling with some friends she'd made at the party, and the next, Kyle was standing in front of her, telling her to leave. His tone wasn't harsh, but there was something cold about it. He hadn't given a reason, just that it was time for her to go. It felt like a slap in the face, and the humiliation that followed was enough to make her question everything she thought she knew about their friendship. But here's the thing, it wasn't just Kyle's behavior that was making Sarah uneasy. There had been others at the party, too, people who had been acting strangely, like her old college friend Rachel. Sarah hadn't seen Rachel in years, but when they locked eyes across the room, she had felt a strange, almost accusatory gaze coming from her. Rachel, who had always been one of Sarah's closest friends, had seemed distant, like she was purposefully avoiding her. Sarah had tried to approach her, but each time she did, Rachel seemed to slip away into another group of people, acting as though she hadn't seen her at all. She hadn't left it that way. She knew she hadn't. She could feel her breath catch in her throat as she slowly approached the door. Had someone been inside? Was she truly alone now, or was someone waiting in the shadows? Sarah's heart raced as she stepped closer, the silence around her becoming suffocating. She pushed the door open, the soft creak of the hinges echoing through the hallway. The apartment looked the same, but there was a strange sense of displacement, like she had just stepped into a different reality. Her eyes scanned the room, falling on her desk, where her laptop had been left open. But it wasn't the laptop that caught her attention, it was the contents of the screen. Someone had accessed her personal files. The documents that she had been researching, the notes on Kyle, Rachel, and Ethan, had all been opened. And at the very top of the screen was a new file, one that hadn't been there before. "You're in too deep." She felt her legs weaken as she took a step back, her mind racing with disbelief. Who had been in her apartment? Who knew about the investigation she was trying to piece together? She hadn't shared anything with anyone, hadn't let on that she was digging for answers. And yet, there it was, an undeniable message left just for her. Someone had been watching her every move, tracking her every step. The walls were closing in, and there was nowhere to run. Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears as she backed away from the desk, her thoughts swirling with paranoia and fear. She had no way of knowing who was behind this, no way of knowing who she could trust. But one thing was certain now: her life, as she knew it, was over. The game was no longer some distant thing. It was happening right in front of her, and she was in the middle of it. And if she didn't figure out who was pulling the strings, she might not make it out alive. Just then, a faint noise from behind her made her freeze, a soft rustling, the creak of a floorboard. Someone was here. Someone was waiting for her to turn around. But when Sarah did, there was nothing. Just the empty hallway behind her. Empty. Or was it? The mystery had deepened, and Sarah was trapped in its grip. The danger wasn't just around the corner anymore, it was inside her own home. And if she didn't find out who was behind it all, if she didn't act quickly, she might never get the chance to find out. As Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, the reality of her situation sank deeper, wrapping around her like a vice. The strange message on her laptop, the feeling of being watched, and the increasingly cryptic warnings were all part of a puzzle she had been trying desperately to solve. The pieces were scattered, but she could feel them slipping through her fingers. Who could she trust? What did they want from her? The fear that had been gnawing at her for days was now consuming her thoughts entirely. She was certain she was being manipulated, but by whom? And for what purpose? She had already come to the horrifying conclusion that her life was in danger, but what if there was more to this than she understood? Everything had started with that party, that odd moment when she had been kicked out by Kyle, the host. But it wasn't until she started digging into his past and the people connected to him that she realized how much deeper this rabbit hole really went. Kyle, Rachel, Ethan, even Jason, no one seemed to have a clean record, and Sarah's mind spun with the endless possibilities of betrayal, secrets, and lies. Yet even as the walls closed in around her, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something essential was being kept from her. What if she was missing something obvious? What if the truth was right in front of her face, hidden in plain sight? She paced the apartment, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts that crashed against her mind. She had to figure this out. She had to know who was behind all this, but how? The messages, the warnings, they were all pieces of a larger picture that didn't make sense. And then, as if fate had decided to hand her a clue, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call from Rachel or Jason. It was from Kyle. Her breath caught in her throat as she answered the call, heart racing in anticipation. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, trying to mask the panic creeping into her tone. "Kyle," came the calm voice on the other end. But it wasn't Kyle's voice. It wasn't even a voice Sarah recognized. There was a long pause before the person continued. "You've been looking in all the wrong places, Sarah. The truth you're trying to uncover, it's not what you think." Her chest tightened as the words hung in the air. "Who is this?" "What do you mean?" she demanded, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She had no idea who was on the other end of the line, but this felt different. It was the first time she'd been truly afraid to hear the truth. "Someone who's been watching you. Someone who's been keeping an eye on everything you've been doing," the voice said, low and cryptic. "And I'm going to make sure you hear the truth. You're going about this all wrong, Sarah. What you're searching for, it's not the person you think it is." A chill ran through her, and her grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean?" She felt like she was on the edge of something, some revelation that could finally answer all her questions, but at the same time, the more she listened, the more tangled the web became. "Don't worry, you'll see soon enough. But you need to stop chasing shadows," the voice continued. "The person you're really after has been in your life this whole time. They've been closer than you know." The line clicked abruptly, cutting off before Sarah could respond. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic words that had just been spoken. What did they mean? Had she been wrong all along? The person she was hunting, the one she thought was pulling the strings, could it have been someone she knew all along? Could it have been someone she trusted? Her thoughts flew back to all the conversations, all the moments that now seemed like signs she had missed. Could it be possible that Rachel, with her warning, wasn't trying to help her but misdirect her? What if Jason's disappearance wasn't just a random coincidence but a deliberate move to trap her? It was then that a memory surfaced, something that had always seemed too trivial to matter. A few weeks before the party, Kyle had mentioned something offhand, something that had never quite sat right with her. He had casually spoken about his connections, the people he knew, his inner circle. Sarah hadn't paid it much attention at the time, but now, with everything falling apart around her, those words lingered in her mind like a whisper of something she hadn't understood. What if Kyle wasn't just a passive player in all this? What if he had been a decoy, a diversion, the person who everyone expected to be the mastermind, but in reality, he was just a piece in someone else's game? The thought hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. It had to be Rachel. She had always been at the center of the mystery, always slipping through Sarah's fingers when she tried to get close. What if Rachel had been orchestrating everything from the beginning, setting the stage for Sarah to walk straight into her trap? The idea gnawed at her mind, twisting her insides. But then she remembered something else, something that contradicted this theory completely. It was the night before the party, when Rachel had slipped something into her bag. At the time, Sarah hadn't thought twice about it. A small, folded piece of paper, tucked in with her lipstick and keys. She hadn't even looked at it until days later, when she found it hidden in the back pocket of her jeans, along with the strange reminder she had jotted down, "Trust no one." That phrase, it had haunted her since, but now she wondered, was it Rachel who had written it, or had it been someone else? Someone who knew Sarah well enough to plant doubt in her mind, someone who knew she would later find it. Suddenly, it all made sense, and none of it made sense at the same time. The person behind all of this had been hiding in plain sight, carefully pulling the strings, manipulating everyone around them. The thought paralyzed Sarah. But then a new wave of realization hit her, sharper than any fear she had felt before. What if the true mastermind was closer than Rachel? What if someone Sarah hadn't even considered was watching her every move, anticipating her every reaction? Her mind reeled with possibilities as a terrible thought struck her with terrifying clarity. The one person she had believed to be her ally, the one person she had trusted implicitly, had been playing her the entire time. But the truth was, Sarah wasn't sure who that was anymore. Was it Kyle, Ethan, Rachel? Or was it someone who had been there from the start, someone whose loyalty had never truly been given, someone who had been pulling her toward this moment all along? She was at the center of something far darker than she could have ever imagined, and now, she was beginning to understand the gravity of what she had walked into. But as the weight of that realization settled on her shoulders, one question remained: who could she trust now, and how could she possibly escape a game where the rules changed every time she thought she had figured them out? The weight of everything pressing down on Sarah was suffocating, each breath becoming more difficult as the walls of uncertainty closed in tighter around her. She had never felt more alone, yet she couldn't shake the growing realization that someone she trusted, someone who had been a part of her life for so long, had to be involved in all of this. The calls, the messages, the cryptic notes, it all pointed to one inescapable truth. The people closest to her had played a role in this nightmare, whether by design or by deceit. But who? Who could she confront without risking everything? And if she did, what would she do if the truth was worse than she could imagine? Her mind kept circling back to Rachel. Rachel, who had warned her to leave, to run, and yet had always seemed to be just one step ahead of her in all of this. Rachel, who had seemed to care so much, but now Sarah wondered if that concern had ever been genuine. Had she been protecting her, or was she trying to keep Sarah from finding out something she wasn't supposed to know? Could Rachel have been the one pulling the strings all along, manipulating Sarah's every move to create a false sense of safety? The more she thought about it, the more tangled the web became. Rachel had been a friend, no, a confidant, and now Sarah didn't know if she could trust a single word she'd ever said. But the ultimatum Sarah received that morning shattered everything she thought she knew, and it came at her like a freight train, leaving her no time to think. The phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, just like the ones she had been receiving over the past few days. But this one felt different. This one had the weight of finality, the kind of finality that came with a decision that couldn't be undone. "You're running out of time, Sarah. This is your choice. You can't have both. Either you stay safe, or you find the truth. But know this, if you keep digging, it's not just your life on the line anymore. People you care about will be hurt. There's no other way out. You can walk away now, or you can keep pushing forward and lose everything." The message hit her like a punch to the gut. She stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as the words sank in. It wasn't just her safety anymore. It was Jason. It was Rachel. It was anyone who had ever been close to her. If she kept going, if she uncovered whatever it was that she was meant to uncover, the consequences were clear: people would suffer, and Sarah might be the one responsible. She had no idea who was behind this threat, but they knew her well enough to understand the one thing that would stop her dead in her tracks: her loved ones. She had to make a choice. The path she had been walking since the night of that party had been leading her deeper into a rabbit hole, each step further pushing her into a situation where the stakes seemed to rise by the hour. But now, it wasn't just her life at risk. It was everyone's. She couldn't save herself without destroying the people she cared about. And yet, if she backed down, if she walked away from everything she had learned, from everything she had uncovered, she might never know the truth. It would remain buried, hidden from her forever. But then, something inside her snapped. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't live like this, in a state of constant fear, constantly wondering what would happen next. She couldn't let this mystery, this web of lies and deceit, control her life any longer. But at the same time, she wasn't ready to just walk away. She needed to know who was behind it all, who was playing this dangerous game with her life. If she had to risk everything, if it meant uncovering the truth once and for all, then so be it. But the price she would pay might be far greater than she could ever imagine. The decision wasn't easy. In fact, it tore at her soul, pulling her in two directions. She wasn't sure she was strong enough for this, she wasn't sure she was prepared to face the kind of evil she might uncover. But every instinct in her body told her she couldn't back down, not now. But could she really face the consequences? Could she deal with what she would find on the other side? She couldn't stop thinking about Rachel. Rachel, who had always been there for her, who had given her that cryptic warning to get out before it was too late. What if Rachel wasn't trying to protect her? What if Rachel was part of this entire conspiracy? The idea of it made Sarah's stomach churn, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Rachel had been hiding something. Sarah had felt it for days, the strange way Rachel had been avoiding her questions, the hesitation in her voice when they spoke. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Rachel was part of this, whether she was doing it willingly or not. And that left Sarah with one impossible question. Could she trust Rachel to tell her the truth? Or was Rachel just another pawn in this dangerous game? And then, as if the universe had conspired to throw more gasoline on the fire, Sarah received a call from Ethan. The last person she ever expected to hear from. Ethan, who had been so silent, so distant ever since the party. She had always thought he was harmless, just a guy who liked to hang out at the edges of things. But now, with everything that had happened, Sarah realized she had underestimated him. Maybe he had known more than he let on, maybe he had been hiding something from her this whole time. Sarah, Ethan's voice was low, almost a whisper, as though he feared someone might be listening. I know what's happening. You don't need to keep digging. You don't know who you're messing with. Her mind raced. What do you mean? What's happening, Ethan? What do you know? You're in over your head, Sarah, he continued, his voice shaking. There are people involved in this who are dangerous. People you don't want to cross. If you keep going, I swear, you won't just be putting yourself at risk. You'll be putting all of us in danger. The words struck her like a slap across the face. People she knew, people she trusted, were part of something far darker than she could ever have imagined. Ethan was trying to warn her, but why? Was he trying to stop her from learning the truth? Or was he genuinely afraid of the consequences, afraid of the dangerous forces lurking behind the scenes? Either way, she couldn't afford to trust him fully. Not yet. Not after everything that had happened. She was running out of time. The choice wasn't just between her safety and the truth anymore, it was between everyone's safety and a truth that might destroy everything. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest as she realized that the answers she sought might not be worth the cost. But no matter what, she had no choice but to face whatever came next. The darkness was closing in, and she couldn't hide from it any longer. The only question left was, who was truly on her side, and who had been lying to her the whole time? Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the phone, Ethan's last words replaying in her head over and over again. There are people involved in this who are dangerous. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she truly understood about what was really happening. She had assumed, naively, that this was just about the people she knew, the ones she had been close to, Kyle, Rachel, Ethan, even Jason. But the message, the warning, had made it clear, this was bigger than any of them. Something darker, more insidious was lurking beneath the surface, and it had been pulling the strings the entire time. The clock was ticking. Every second she hesitated, every moment she questioned herself, was another moment she gave them, whoever they were, to finish what they had started. She grabbed her jacket and rushed out the door. There was no time to waste. As much as she wanted to confront Rachel, to demand answers from her face to face, she knew that was a risk she couldn't afford to take right now. Everything had spiraled so quickly, one wrong move, and it could all be over. Sarah had learned the hard way that nothing was as it seemed. Every lead she'd followed, every step she'd taken had only led to more questions, more confusion. Now, she needed answers, and she needed them fast. Her mind raced as she drove through the city, the landscape blurring outside the window. She thought about the people who had been part of her life for so long, and how every one of them had been a part of this conspiracy in some way. Even Rachel, even Jason, they were all pieces of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle she had barely scratched the surface of. She realized now that she had been manipulated, but worse than that, she had been used. All those late-night phone calls, the mysterious texts, the cryptic messages, all of it had been designed to lead her down a path of confusion, to make her question everyone around her, to make her doubt herself. And now, Sarah was starting to see it, the patterns in the chaos, the web that had been spun around her. The truth was bigger than she ever could have imagined. The people involved were not just from her circle, not just from her past, they were connected to something much darker, more widespread, something that reached into the heart of the city, maybe even beyond it. Whoever was behind all this had connections that ran deeper than she could have ever known, and they weren't playing by the same rules. The stakes were no longer just about her safety. They were about her life and the lives of everyone she cared about. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Kyle. "You're getting too close, Sarah. You don't know who you're dealing with. Drop it now, or people will start paying for your mistakes." She felt a surge of anger rush through her, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Was this really happening? Was this the same Kyle who had been so kind to her just a few weeks ago, the one she thought she could trust? He was threatening her now, as if she had no choice but to back down. But this was no longer about him. This was bigger, much bigger than any of them. If he was involved, if Rachel was involved, then they were just puppets in someone else's game. As Sarah pulled up to a street corner, her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on the window. She gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned to see Ethan standing there, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. "Get out of the car," he urged, his voice low and urgent. "Now. There's no time. They know you're close. We need to go, now." She could feel the blood draining from her face as she unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. This wasn't good. Ethan was acting like a man on the edge, someone who knew things that Sarah didn't. And the fear in his eyes, it was real. "What's going on, Ethan?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, trying to understand what was happening. "They've been watching us, Sarah. Watching all of us. The people you trust, the ones who've been with you through this whole thing, they're part of it, too. All of them." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Even me." Her stomach twisted as she processed his words. "What do you mean, even you?" "I'm involved. I've been involved from the beginning." Ethan's face was grim, his eyes darting around as if someone might be watching them right then. "But I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know they were this powerful. They've been pulling strings from behind the scenes, controlling everything, every move we make. I never thought it would go this far, Sarah, I swear to you. But now, they know you're onto them." The words hit Sarah like a sledgehammer. Ethan, the one person she had thought she could rely on, had been part of it all along. The realization washed over her in waves, each one more suffocating than the last. "Why, Ethan? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why let me go this far if you knew?" "I didn't know what to do," he confessed, his voice breaking. "They have my family, Sarah. They have my sister. They've been controlling me the whole time. And now, they want you to stop. But I can't let you keep going. It's too dangerous. They'll kill you if you keep digging." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah's mind reeled, her heart racing. How could she trust anything anymore? Ethan had been right beside her, had been feeding her information, yet he had been playing both sides. The deception cut deeper than she could have imagined. Before she could respond, Ethan grabbed her arm, his grip tight, almost desperate. "They're coming. We don't have much time. We need to go, now, before it's too late." But as they turned to leave, the sound of tires screeching on the pavement echoed through the street. Sarah whipped her head around to see a dark car speeding toward them, headlights blinding in the night. It was them. The ones Ethan had been warning her about. They had found her. And now, there was no way out. Everything she thought she understood, every connection she had made, was shattering in front of her eyes. The conspiracy was so much bigger than she could have ever known. They had been watching, pulling the strings, controlling everything. Kyle, Rachel, Jason, even Ethan. They were all part of this game, pawns in a larger scheme, and now they were all expendable. The people she had trusted, the people she had believed to be her friends, had been using her all along. And now, with nowhere left to turn, Sarah realized the full scope of what she had gotten herself into. The dark car screeched to a stop, and the doors flung open. Figures stepped out, tall and imposing, their faces obscured in the shadows. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the truth was clearer than ever. This was bigger than her. This was about power, control, and secrets buried so deep, no one could escape them. And now, Sarah had no choice but to face the consequences of everything she had uncovered. The night was thick with tension, a suffocating silence hanging in the air as Sarah stood face to face with the shadows of her past, with everything she had feared but had never fully understood. The car doors had slammed shut, and the figures standing in front of her were like ghosts, moving with purpose but shrouded in darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat like a countdown to something inevitable. She felt Ethan's grip on her arm tighten, pulling her back slightly, as if to shield her from the inevitable confrontation. But there was no escaping now. This was the moment. The truth was here, and there was no turning back. The figures in front of her began to take shape, their movements deliberate, almost rehearsed. The leader of the group, tall and commanding, stepped forward, his face still hidden in shadow. There was something chillingly familiar about him. A gnawing recognition, like a piece of the puzzle Sarah had been trying to fit together finally snapping into place. It wasn't until he spoke that the cold realization hit her. "I've been waiting for this moment, Sarah," the man said, his voice low and smooth, like he had been rehearsing the words for a long time. "You've done well to get this far. But you should have stopped a lot sooner. People like you, they always think they can outrun the truth. But in the end, it's always there, waiting. And you've walked right into it." Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew this voice. She recognized it from a conversation that had seemed meaningless at the time, something that had seemed like a small, trivial encounter until now. Kyle. The same Kyle who had been her friend, her confidant, the one who had always seemed to have her back. The one who had warned her, even pushed her to walk away. But now, everything fell into place. Kyle wasn't trying to protect her. He was trying to control her, to manipulate her, to steer her away from something he didn't want her to uncover. Kyle had been the mastermind from the very beginning, playing both sides, feeding her just enough information to keep her moving in circles. And now, Sarah was face to face with him and the real danger. But there was something else, something even more disturbing, that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Behind Kyle, in the shadows, stood Rachel. Her heart twisted painfully in her chest as she saw Rachel's face. The woman who had always been there for her, the one who had seemed so trustworthy, so reliable. Rachel's expression was unreadable, emotionless, as if the woman Sarah had known and loved no longer existed. She had been a part of it all along. She had played her role, just like Kyle, just like everyone else. Sarah had been a pawn in a game she hadn't even known was being played. Ethan stepped forward, a defeated look on his face. "I told you to stop, Sarah. You don't know what you're up against. You can't fight this. Not now, not ever." "Ethan," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me get this far if you knew?" Ethan's eyes were filled with regret, but his words were as cold as the night air around them. "I didn't have a choice. They have my sister. They know everything about us. I thought I could protect you. But I was just as trapped as you." Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. She couldn't trust anyone now, not Kyle, not Rachel, not even Ethan. But one thing was clear, she was standing on the edge of the truth. Everything had led her to this moment, and there was no turning back. She needed to find the one last piece of the puzzle. And just as she was about to take a step forward, a sudden noise from behind stopped her cold. A voice called out from the darkness. "Not so fast, Sarah." Sarah whipped around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, A man who had been standing unnoticed until now. He was tall, his face hidden behind a dark mask, but there was something about him that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It was like he had been there the entire time, like he had been pulling the strings all along. "My name is Sam," the man said, his voice deep and menacing. "And I think you're just beginning to understand how deep this goes." Sarah's mind spun. Sam? Who was he? Was he part of the conspiracy too? And if so, what role had he been playing? Everything Sarah thought she knew was crumbling before her eyes. But then, Sam stepped closer, his hand pulling something out of his pocket, something that made Sarah's stomach drop. A small, simple USB drive. "This," Sam said, holding it up for her to see, "is the final piece of the puzzle you've been so desperate to find. Everything you've been looking for is right here. The answers, the people behind this, everything. But I don't think you'll like what you find." Sarah's heart raced. She didn't trust him, not for a second, but the USB drive was everything. It was the key to unraveling the truth, to exposing the conspiracy once and for all. With shaking hands, she reached out and grabbed it, her fingers brushing his cold ones for a fleeting moment. But as soon as the USB drive was in her possession, everything changed. The ground beneath them trembled, and Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. Her eyes darted to the street, where flashing blue lights reflected off the walls of the buildings. They were being surrounded. The people who had been pulling the strings, the ones who had orchestrated everything, were not the only ones who were watching. The police, the authorities, had finally caught wind of the conspiracy, and now they were closing in. For a split second, Sarah thought they were all going to be arrested. That the game was over, that she would be able to take the USB drive to the authorities and finally expose the truth. But then, Kyle's face twisted into a smirk. "You really think it's that simple, Sarah?" he laughed, stepping back into the shadows. "You think they'll just let you walk away with the truth? You think you're the one who's been in control this whole time?" And in that instant, everything shifted. The police sirens that had been growing louder suddenly faded into the distance. The flashing lights disappeared. The streetlights above flickered and died. It was as if the entire world around her had shifted, had turned off, and she was standing in the middle of a void. Kyle stepped forward again, his smirk widening. "You were never meant to win, Sarah. You were always meant to lose. This was all a test. And you failed." Suddenly, the USB drive in Sarah's hand felt heavier than it ever had before. The truth was within her reach, but now, she wasn't sure she could trust anything, or anyone, anymore. She had uncovered the conspiracy, but she had no idea who was playing her, who was telling the truth, or who had orchestrated everything. And in the end, maybe the worst twist of all was realizing that the final battle wasn't about the truth, it was about survival. With the sirens growing distant, Sarah was left standing there, unsure of who to trust, what to believe, or even if she was still safe. The answers were in her hands, but she couldn't shake the terrifying realization that the battle for the truth wasn't over, it had just begun. Days had passed since the chaos had unfolded, and Sarah was still trying to process everything that had happened. The world around her felt quieter now, but the echoes of the events still lingered in her mind like a constant hum. She had held on to the USB drive for so long, but now, as she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the device in her palm, she realized that it no longer held the answers she had desperately sought. The truth she thought would bring her peace, the answers she believed would free her, had only left her with more questions. The police had closed in, yes, but the web of lies and deceit ran so deep that no one, not even the authorities, seemed to know the full extent of the conspiracy. People had been arrested, names had been uncovered, but the true puppet masters, the ones who had orchestrated everything from the shadows, were still out there, hidden, untouchable. Even now, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had only scratched the surface, that the battle she'd fought had been just the beginning. The last time she had seen Ethan, he had promised that things would get better, that they would figure it out together. But now, weeks later, he was gone. His messages had stopped, his presence in her life, a constant reassurance, had vanished. She didn't know if it was because he had been forced to disappear or if it was because he had been caught in the crossfire of the twisted game that had swallowed them all. She had tried to reach out, but nothing. It felt like he was part of a life she no longer recognized. Even Rachel, once a close friend, had faded into the background. She had been part of the conspiracy, but after the arrests and the investigations, Rachel had been quiet, as if the world she had helped to create had swallowed her whole. Sarah stood up, the weight of the USB drive still heavy in her pocket, and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. The city she had once loved, the city that had felt so familiar, now seemed like a maze of secrets and shadows. The people she had trusted were all part of a system she couldn't understand. And while she had come so close to unraveling the truth, she had learned that sometimes knowing the truth wasn't the key to freedom, it was knowing when to walk away. She didn't know what had happened to Kyle or Sam, the shadowy figures who had been lurking in the dark, pulling the strings from the start. For all she knew, they were still out there, watching her, waiting for the moment to strike again. She let out a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the silence envelop her. The truth was a double-edged sword. It could free you, but it could also destroy everything you held dear. Sarah had lost so much already. She had lost her sense of trust, her belief in the people around her, her peace of mind. But in a strange way, she had also found herself. In the process of unraveling the web of lies, in the moments of doubt, fear, and pain, Sarah had learned something vital about herself. She had learned how to survive in a world that was constantly shifting, constantly changing. She had learned that the fight for the truth wasn't always about victory or defeat, it was about the courage to keep going, to keep living, even when the answers seemed impossible to find. And then, just as Sarah was about to leave the apartment, something caught her eye. The old family photo on the wall, the one of her and her parents from years ago, when everything had seemed so simple, so safe. She walked over to it, her fingers tracing the edges of the frame. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to remember the person she used to be, before all the chaos. Before the lies. Before the darkness. And in that quiet moment, something shifted inside of her. She realized that no matter how much she had lost, no matter how many people had deceived her, she still had herself. She had her strength, her resilience, and the knowledge that, in the end, she could face whatever was still waiting for her. The conspiracy might not be over, but it didn't have to define her anymore. She could choose to move forward, to rebuild, and to take control of the pieces of her life that had been left in ruins. But as she turned to leave the room, her phone buzzed on the counter. She hesitated, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up as she walked over to it. It was a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words on the screen. "You think you've escaped, Sarah. But the game is far from over. We're watching. And you won't be able to hide forever." A chill ran down her spine. She had hoped, so desperately, that it was over. That she could finally breathe, finally have peace. But the truth, whatever it was, had a way of resurfacing when she least expected it. It was as if the darkness she had uncovered had followed her into the light. And now, she couldn't escape it. Sarah stood there, the phone in her hand, the weight of the message settling in her chest. The story wasn't over. The mystery wasn't solved. And even though she had come so far, the road ahead was still filled with uncertainty. The truth had a price, and Sarah had paid it. But there was one thing she knew for sure: no matter how much they tried to pull her back into the shadows, she wouldn't go quietly. The game might not be over, but she was no longer a pawn. She was ready to play by her own rules. As the city lights flickered outside her window, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would find the answers, no matter what it took. The truth was out there, and she wasn't going to stop until she uncovered every last secret. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that the story was far from over. The conspiracy had only just begun to show its true face. And who knew what the next chapter would bring? For now, all she could do was keep moving forward. Keep fighting. Because the truth, as elusive as it was the only thing that could set her free.